In this 8 video series, I'll explain to you everything that you need to know about diuretics. Let's start right now. Hi, this is Dr. Avinash. I'm the medical coaching expert and I'm on a mission to help a million medicos clear their basics, upgrade their knowledge and excel in their clinical practice. This video is one out of the 8-part video series about pharmacology of diuretics. This video we are going to discuss in details the physiological aspect of urine formation so that mechanism of action of all the diuretics gets crystal clear in your mind. Let's start with the concept then. Now we all know the fact that the nephrons are the structural and functional unit of the kidney, and urine formation is a 3-step process. Step number 1 is ultrafiltration, step number 2 is tubular reabsorption, and step number 3 is tubular secretion. I believe you also remember the fact that the ultrafiltration happens at the level of glomerulus and it is at the rate of 125 ml per minute. That's about 180 liters of filtrate per day. Now that is the amount of urine we do not want to pass. And we don't pass 180 liters of urine per day. We pass somewhere around 1.5 liters, 2 liters of urine in an entire day. Correct? Which means out of the glomerular filtrate, 99% gets reabsorbed and hardly 1% is excreted out. Very simple, easy to understand concept. Now, I want you to imagine making a medicine that does not affect glomerular ultrafiltration, does not affect tubular secretion, it directly affects tubular reabsorption. And not by big margin, we are trying to change the reabsorption, we are trying to decrease the reabsorption by 1% or so. Theoretically, if you decrease the reabsorption from 99% to 98%, that's only 1% difference, right? The urine output will become 1 to 2%, right? It will change from 1% to 2%. It's literally doubling the amount of urine that is coming out. From 1.5 liter, the urine output will become 3 liters. So that's the basic concept. With a small tweak in the tubular reabsorption, we can get huge urine output. Okay, so we first must understand at what levels the reabsorption takes place. And that's the reason why we are going to divide the entire nephron, the tube of the nephron, into different sites. Site number 1 is going to be the proximal convoluted tubule. Here, let us take one of the solute which is excreted out, NaHCO3. NaHCO3 easily dissociates into HCO3 minus and Na plus inside the lumen of the proximal convoluted tubule. Now our body tries to save sodium as much as possible. So we want to take the sodium back into our body, into our cells, right? But for that, you need to have an exchange offer going on. So this is what the kidney does. Carbon dioxide produced as a result of respiration in the renal epithelial cells, the cells of the PCT, proximal convoluted tubule, react with the water present in the cells of the PCT to form H2CO3. H2CO3 dissociates into H plus and HCO3 minus, and the PCT cells, the proximal convoluted tubular cells, exchange this H plus for sodium ion. Easy, simple. And now that we have maintained neutrality, we have given a positive ion and we have taken a positive ion. So it's kind of an exchange of give positive, take positive, give H plus, take Na plus. That Na plus and the HCO3 minus produced inside the cell can be given to the blood, to the interstitial space, so that Na plus, which was supposed to be excreted in urine, as you can see on your screen right now, is saved, right? But inside the lumen, this is what happens. H plus combines with the HCO3 minus ion to form H2CO3. That H2CO3 splits into H2O and CO2, and that can be reabsorbed. So you can see how NaHCO3 is reabsorbed, and that's how sodium is saved. Now this is one of the many methods which uses an enzyme called as carbonic anhydrase. Let me be very clear, the carbonic anhydrase present inside the epithelial cells is different from the carbonic anhydrase present outside. So the carbonic anhydrase that does the splitting of H2CO3 outside in the lumen, that is called as luminal carbonic anhydrase. And the one which is doing the job of converting H2O plus CO2 into H2CO3 inside the cell, that is called as cellular carbonic anhydrase. So two different carbonic anhydrases, a cellular and a luminal, right? And this is how Na plus was saved, was reabsorbed. And remember, wherever salt, wherever sodium, there is water. So when you reabsorb Na plus, automatically you are reabsorbing water also. So this was a good target. If we could somehow interfere with the reabsorption of sodium in the PCT, then water would also not have been reabsorbed, unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you are looking at it. Sodium ion can be reabsorbed by 4 different pathways at proximal convoluted tubular level. First is by direct absorption along the concentration gradient. Sodium is more inside the lumen of the PCT, it is less in the interstitium, it will come out. Second is, as I have shown on the screen, coupled with hydrogen ion. Third is to maintain neutrality and isotonicity. By this, what I am trying to suggest is, if some negative ion was absorbed, like a chloride, to maintain electrical balance, Na plus can be reabsorbed. Or let's say water was reabsorbed, to maintain osmolarity, Na plus will be reabsorbed. So this is how things will work. And the fourth way is by a symport mechanism with glucose and amino acids and many other things. Now remember, when the same ion is absorbed by 4 different ways, it's very difficult to make a medicine that blocks 4 different pathways, right? And that's the reason why we do not have any medicine that can work on site 1, on all these 4 aspects at least. We don't have a medicine that works on all these 4 different pathways of Na plus reabsorption. Easy, right? Now, proximal convoluted tubule is out of equation. Let's talk about the loop of Henle. The loop of Henle will be considered as site 2 for the time being. I am going to talk about the medullary part of loop of Henle. Actually speaking, the ascending limb of loop of Henle. Here, there is a special pump. This pump is called as Na plus K plus 2Cl minus pump. Sodium, potassium, 2-chloride pump. This is how the pump works. From the fluid present in the lumen of the ascending limb of loop of Henle, 1 sodium, 1 potassium and 2 chloride ions attach to this pump on the luminal side. The pump then undergoes conformational change. Of course, ATP is spent and Na plus, K plus and 2 chloride are reabsorbed. Then we have sodium potassium ATPase pump, which kind of exchanges Na plus with K plus, and sodium goes back into the interstitium and chloride is sent back to maintain isotonicity. This pump is very important. This Na plus K plus 2 chloride minus pump. This pump is the one which is responsible for counter current multiplier, the system that is important for creating an osmotic gradient, corticomedullary osmotic gradient in the kidney. And without this counter current multiplier mechanism, concentration of urine cannot take place. So if I have to ask, what is the number 1 way by which urine is concentrated, you are going to answer the Na plus K plus 2 chloride minus pump, because this pump is responsible for counter current multiplier mechanism, which means if I can make a medicine that blocks this counter current multiplier, this Na plus K plus 2 chloride minus pump, then I would be successful in diluting urine the maximum. Easy peasy, simple. I hope so. Let's move on to the cortical part of loop of Henle, the cortical part of ascending limb of loop of Henle. Here there's another pump which is responsible for reabsorbing sodium. See, every single thing that I'm talking about is about reabsorbing sodium, because wherever sodium, there is water. When you reabsorb salt, Na plus, water will follow. So even in the cortical part of ascending limb of loop of Henle, there is a pump to reabsorb sodium. It's called as the sodium chloride pump. Na plus comes in, brings in a chloride. ATP is spent. That Na plus will be returned to the interstitium into the blood via sodium potassium ATPase pump, and chloride will go back to maintain the iso electric levels to maintain neutrality. So this is how things can get absorbed at the level of the cortical part of ascending limb of loop of Henle. Now please understand, is this pump powerful enough in concentrating urine? Yes. If you block this, will you be able to dilute urine? Yes. Is it as powerful as the sodium potassium 2 chloride pump? No. This is the second best concentrating mechanism we have. Easy? So if this is the second best concentrating mechanism we have, if we somehow block this, will we be able to dilute urine? Yes. Will it be as dilute as the one which we obtained by blocking the sodium potassium 2 chloride pump? No. It will be less dilute than the first one, but still dilute enough. And that's the reason why medicines which work on site 2, the ascending limb of loop of Henle, medullary part, they are called as high efficacy or high ceiling diuretics, whereas medicines that work in the cortical part of ascending limb of loop of Henle at sodium chloride pump, they are called as medium efficacy diuretics. Easy? See, ideally the PCT, the loop of Henle, should have reabsorbed sodium the level at which our body requires. That much should have been absorbed, leaving very little sodium for reaching the last part called as site 4, the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting ducts. So salt and water has been already reabsorbed. Most of it has been reabsorbed. Sometimes it so happens that your body requires more reabsorption of sodium, and then the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct has to contribute. Now how will that happen? Well, site 4, DCD and collecting duct by themselves cannot reabsorb sodium, but there's a hormone called as aldosterone. Let's call it mineralocorticoid. This aldosterone or mineralocorticoid is a steroid hormone. It can come inside the cell. Inside the cell of the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct, there is a special receptor called as mineralocorticoid receptor. This mineralocorticoid receptor binds to the aldosterone molecule, and this hormone receptor complex enters into the nucleus. Here it interacts with specific segments of DNA, genes, and the gene gets converted to mRNA. mRNA becomes proteins. Because these proteins were formed because of aldosterone, we are going to call it aldosterone induced protein. Simple. One of the important aldosterone induced protein is the sodium potassium ATPase pump, located at the basolateral membrane of the distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct. This pump will take sodium from the cell of the DCT and give it to the blood. Now you might be thinking, if this pump is removing sodium from the cell and giving it to the blood, then it means that the level of sodium inside the cell is falling. Exactly, yes. And that's the reason why there's one more aldosterone induced protein which is formed. This protein is called as amiloride sensitive sodium channel. This is not a pump, this is a sodium channel. Okay. Now understand this. The pump spends ATP. Channel does not spend ATP. Channel allows sodium to come in if concentration gradient decides. What does it mean? Let me put it in simple words. Sodium in the cell is now at a low concentration. Why? Because of sodium potassium ATPase pump, right? Sodium in the lumen, in the urine, is at a higher concentration. So because of amiloride sensitive sodium channel, that sodium will come in. Now please note, when sodium comes in, you have to give away some positive. Huh? So you give away what? Potassium. Exchange offer. Bring in sodium, give away potassium. You can even exchange sodium for hydrogen here. So if the level of potassium is low, you can even give away hydrogen. Now remember this, the net potassium loss, how much potassium will be lost to save sodium, will depend on how much sodium has to be saved, how much sodium is delivered to the distal part. Second, is there aldosterone? If there is no aldosterone, there is no aldosterone induced protein, there is no channel, there is no pump. Simple. And third, is there H plus available? Because if H plus is available, then along with K plus, you can exchange hydrogen also. So you save on K plus. And what if K plus is not there? Then you have to give away H plus, right? So fourth thing decides how much potassium will be exchanged for sodium. How much sodium goes to the distal segments? Is there aldosterone? Is there H plus available? And what is the level of K plus inside the cell? That decides how much potassium will be lost. If you block this amiloride sensitive sodium channel, can sodium come in? No. Remember, if sodium cannot come in, will water come in? No. Which means water and salt will remain inside the urine and the patient will pass large amount of urine. Diuresis will take place? Yes. Will it be as effective as site 2 and site 3? Definitely. And that's the reason why drugs that work here at this level, at site 4, they are called as low efficacy diuretics or adjuvant diuretics. Well, there's one more method. Can I block aldosterone? Can I block aldosterone receptor? Of course, yes. If you block the aldosterone receptor, the DNA will not get converted into RNA. RNA will not give rise to aldosterone-induced protein. No aldosterone-induced proteins, no exchange offer. So sodium will remain inside the lumen. Easy, simple. Now at site 4, there's one more hormone that works. It is anti-diuretic hormone. This hormone is also responsible for concentrating urine. Now how does this hormone work? Well, it makes use of a transporter called as urea transporter 1, also called as VRUT, vasopressin regulated urea transporter 1. And by using this, the medulla becomes hypertonic. And when medulla becomes hypertonic, it sucks out water. So this is one method by which ADH can also cause concentration of urine. Luckily, we do not have drugs that work on these, so we don't have to study that in detail. But till the time you have understood what happens at site 1, what happens at site 2, what happens at site 3, and what happens at site 4, you're through. Please, if you're going to give an exam, don't write site 1, site 2, site 3, and site 4. Site is only for our convenience of understanding. When you're writing an exam, site 1 has to be referred to as proximal convoluted tubular cells. Site 2 has to be referred to as the ascending limb of loop of Henle medullary part. Site 3 has to be referred to as the cortical part of ascending limb of loop of Henle, and site 4 has to be referred to as the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. Write full names in your exams. Simple, easy to understand. And that brings me to the classification which is given in your textbooks. If you notice, the classification also goes the same method. At site 1 we really don't have many medicines working, right? But at site 2 and site 3 we have high efficacy and medium efficacy diuretics, and that's exactly what is reflected in your classification. So if you see, high efficacy diuretics are the one which inhibit Na plus K plus 2 chloride co-transporter, which are furosemide, bumetanide, toracimide. The medium efficacy diuretics are the inhibitors of Na plus K plus symport channel, which includes thiazides and thiazide-like diuretics. Hydrochlorothiazide, benzthiazide, hydroflumethiazide, bendroflumethiazide, and thiazide-like include chlorthalidone, metolazone, zipamide, indapamide, clopamide. And then we have the weak ones which work everywhere else, the potassium sparing, aldosterone antagonist, inhibitors of that sodium channel. Or we have carbonic anhydrase inhibitors. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitor example is acetazolamide. We don't really use it as a diuretic, we use it somewhere else. but we'll talk about it. Potassium sparing diuretics include aldosterone antagonists such as spironolactone and eplerenone, and inhibitors of that sodium channel, triamterene and amiloride. And lastly, we also have osmotic diuretics including mannitol, isosorbide and glycerol. So logically the classification is understood, plus the mechanism of action is also understood.